Good evening, everyone. My name is Jane Ehinmoro, and I, along with Brooksie Boutet, are co-chairs of the Mentorship and Transitions Committee, and we're happy to host you all for the Navigating the Job Market During the Coronavirus Pandemic panel tonight. Our panelists are Marie Carlisle with Baker Hostetler. She's the Houston hiring partner. JB Pullias, who is a VOYlegal director, and Genevieve Graham, who is a senior counsel at Jackson Walker. This event is approved for 1 hour of CLE credit and is being recorded. The format of the event will be a panel discussion followed by a question and answer portion. Please feel free to submit any questions you have via email to me at jehinmoro@jonesday.com. If that was a mouthful, please feel free to use the private chat feature in Zoom and send the questions directly to me, and I'll be sure to make sure that they're addressed at the end at the Q&A session. If you haven't already done so, please be sure to mute your microphone during the panel. And with that, I will kick this to Brooksie to kick this off.
Thanks so much, Jane. And hello, everyone. My name is Brooksie. I'm a trial attorney at Shipley, Snell, Montgomery. I'm pleased to be the moderator of our esteemed panel this evening. We actually had the part one of this panel in May with a different group of guests who had incredible insights of what was going on with the job market at the very beginning of the pandemic. So tonight, we'll talk some about what themes we're seeing throughout and also what's been going on over the past 6 months and the look ahead to maybe a forecast of the 2021 job market. But first, I'd like to turn it over to our panelists to tell us a little more about themselves. Marie, would you get us started?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Marie Carlisle, and I am a litigator and a partner with Baker Hostetler in our Houston office. I'm actually a second career attorney. I was previously, before I was an attorney, I was actually a chemist for 7 years, and then decided to go back to school for some crazy reason, and now I'm here. I am the hiring partner in the Houston office, and I can absolutely agree that this has been a very tumultuous year, I think, for everybody with hiring. So I'm happy to be here this evening and hopefully give you some guidance and answer any questions you all might have.
JB, how about you next?
Awesome. Hey guys, thank you so much for letting me join in this and take part. I think it's going to be a great conversation. Just a little bit of background on me. My name is JB Pullias. I'm a director with a agency by the name of VOYlegal. I started my personal private practice after getting out of law school in 2010 in Louisiana. I started practicing in Houston, where I practiced for about 6 years, mostly doing oil and gas transactional work at a small boutique in Houston. I got into recruiting in 2016 with Robert Half Legal, where I placed attorneys and support staff and in-house counsels, basically anything that was related to the legal world. I moved to Austin with my family about almost 3 years ago. And I joined VOYlegal, where we specialize more specifically on attorney placements. And my role with VOYlegal is I manage the Texas markets for associate placements, although I do operate nationally. And I also focus on partner and practice group placements nationally.
Awesome. And Jen?
Hi, so my name's Jen Graham. I am a bankruptcy attorney, senior counsel at Jackson Walker. I think we're going to talk about it, but I started at Jackson Walker June 1, so during the pandemic. And this is also a second career for me. I was in politics in DC, went to law school, didn't plan to practice. I also graduated in 2011, which wasn't a great year for grads. So I didn't have the summer associate route. I got here a different way and somehow found my perfect job. So 2020 grads, it's going to be okay.
Well, it's so good to have all of you. And I guess a good starting point would be with JB. If you could just give us an overlook of what's been going on over the past 6 months as far as hiring, lack thereof, in the legal market.
Absolutely. I mean, it's been an interesting time. I think I can probably speak for everybody when I say that, whether you're a recruiter or a partner or an associate or a law student. We've seen some interesting trends developing over the past 6 months or since you guys had the kind of round one of this in May. Some good news, some bad news. It's not all bad though. We definitely saw kind of a marked drop off over June and July of not just lateral movement, but postings and opportunities available at both large law firms and small law firms. But it really seems that the market has started to pick up a little bit. And when I was kind of going through some data in our system to share with you guys today, it seems like we're slowly getting back to the levels that we would normally expect for this time of year, or at least what we saw towards the beginning of this year. So that's a great thing. And, you know, across the practice areas that were still busy last time when you guys first did this in May, I think a lot of that still holds true. Litigation being kind of the main driver of need in Texas, not just in Houston, but in Dallas and Austin as well. There have been some other things that have developed. I mean, labor and employment still pretty active. Bankruptcy is still pretty active. We've seen corporate still very slow, and that's unfortunate, but it is starting to come back around. We've seen a slow uptick kind of in need from law firms, mostly on the big law side in the corporate space over the past couple months. And it's a trend that we think is going to continue as we move on into 2021. I was an energy attorney for a long time, and I'm sure people in Houston are curious about what's going on in the energy markets and how that's going to affect lateral hiring as we move forward. I wish I had better news for you guys, and I certainly feel for you, as with myself and all of my friends that I used to practice with and in the oil business. It's still pretty slow out there in that regard, but we are seeing trends that are pretty positive, especially with kind of ancillary energy practices, things like renewables. I have been working on a couple of partner searches all across the country for the past few months in the renewable space for project finance partners, M&A, real estate, you kind of name it. And across the board, all across the country, renewable practices are very busy. And I think that that's echoed by what you've been hearing in the political realm and kind of where we see this going. As an energy guy at heart, I think it'll all come back. So you energy transactional attorneys, I don't think you need to panic, but you know, if you can gain access to experience in the renewable sector, I think it's a great idea. Another trend that we've been seeing develop is related to life sciences and IP related things, things that have to do with biotech, pharma, tech transactions in the IP and tech space. And I definitely think that's going to continue. But one theme has been kind of present throughout this entire year with regard to lateral opportunities and hiring, and that's been in litigation. And I think that firms use litigation as a hedge sometimes, particularly larger firms, to maybe compensate for a lack of business and other transactional areas of practice. And that is certainly continuing. And we've seen a lot of partner needs and partner movement, as well as associate needs being driven by litigation. And I think that's going to continue as we move forward. As far as lateral moves, I do have some data to share with you guys, and I'm going to look off screen for a second because I can't remember all of this stuff. But I looked at kind of what the market looked like from January to May, kind of what you guys were focused on last time. And this is not perfect, so don't quote me on these numbers. We pretty good at VOYlegal in the data that we collect, but it's not perfect. But there were about 283 lateral moves between January 1st and May 31st of this year. It's actually interesting because the trend started off kind of more on the front end of that, and that all makes sense because the process was started for lateral interviews in December or November, and we saw that kind of tail off and get really slow in the summertime. But since June 1st to now, we've seen about 113 lateral moves for associates. So these are first-year attorneys, not counting brand new attorneys, all the way up to, you know, maybe a 2013, 2012. So there's been about 113 moves in the Texas market, about 43 in Houston. Litigation still counts for a large majority of that, about 20. Transactional practices, corporate, M&A, capital markets, finance, about 7. Labor and employment actually has been a little bit slower in Houston. You see a little bit more of that movement in Dallas. Bankruptcy and IP still pretty active. But what we've seen, like I said before, is kind of, we started off the year strong because last year was a really busy year for lateral movement in the Texas markets. And it stayed high and it started to slow down right around March, right, whenever the shutdowns happened. And then it basically fell off the map in June and July. But we've seen a steady rise, an uptick in lateral moves over the past couple months, with August having 17 lateral moves for associates in Texas, September 34, October 52. So we're kind of getting right back to where we'd like to see it.
Marie, can you comment about your experience from within a law firm?
Sure, absolutely. So well, following up on some of the comments that JB said, we did, prior to the pandemic starting, we had some people that we had already, some associates that we'd already been speaking with about lateral positions with our firm. So those, once the pandemic started, we did end up carrying that through, and we have had, well, I think at least one of counsel and 2 associates start in our Houston office during the pandemic, which has been a unique position for them. Oh, wait, actually, I lied. 2 partners, 2 associates, and 1 of counsel. We brought over a group of partners, and we had been meeting with them in December and January, and everything kind of got signed in March and April, and they started, and they ended up bringing an associate with them. So we've got them. They were in labor and employment. We also did have somebody who joined our international trade group during this time. Again, those were all people we had started the talks with and brought them over during the pandemic. And it was interesting to bring them in at a time where everything was remote. They did have some interaction. They had met people through the initial interview process. So it was a little easier. We knew who they were. We knew their names. But it was unique for them, trying to get them on board and get them busy. Luckily for us, those were 2 areas, since we'd been looking, where we had a need for work. And so that made the transition a little smoother, because we had projects ready to send to them once they started. The same thing with our of counsel that joined. She is in our data privacy healthcare group. So, which is another area that we actually personally, or our firm at least here locally, has seen a need for attorneys in. So we've had that process. Additionally, I can tell you we are currently looking for someone in our labor and employment group. Not just to sell that, but we are. So we did, following along again with what JB was saying, once the pandemic started, we carried out all of the people we'd been meeting with, and then we did have a slowdown, in part because we were trying to assess the market, just for the attorneys we already have, and to see what was going on and where our needs might be. As things have turned out okay, and the firm is doing well, and we still have work coming in, we've started again hiring and reaching out. So we are looking for at least an associate now in that area. Our litigation group has seen some of it's specific to cases that we have going on. So we've had some downturn, but we still do have litigation going on. This past 2 weeks have been busier than I have been probably the entire pandemic. It's crazy the way that has worked out. So we're staying busy. With the onboarding, I think that's been kind of one of our key just one of the biggest issues is getting them integrated, getting them in the firm, because it's hard when you don't have the coffee chat where you're going in the kitchen, you're getting a cup of coffee, you see someone else, you just have a conversation, you grab lunch with people. All of that's not happening. So we have to be more deliberate in reaching out, making opportunities, and making them feel included. And also, it's been an extra burden for people coming in, because they need to, they're having to step up a little as well. I don't know how much people want me to talk about it, but I can tell you with the summer associate process this summer, that was also a challenge. We, like many firms, ended up doing a shorter program. It was 4 weeks, and it was all remote. And so that was a challenge. I will say I was very impressed with the summer associates. I think maybe because they're younger, they're a little more used to the computer and the digital age than some of us older attorneys. So they did well with it coming in, but we did have virtual lunches planned every day. They weren't you didn't have to eat lunch, but just an opportunity to meet partners and associates. And we had coffee breaks, same thing. And a lot of our summers did take the initiative and reach out to people, hey, I looked at your bio and you've done work in this area and I really enjoyed it, or I really am interested in it. I'd like to, have a meeting with you. And so that was one way we found of kind of making them feel like they were part of the firm and getting them to learn a little more about our culture, because that's one of the biggest things, I think, is figuring out the culture of the firm you're working at. And it's very difficult to do remotely.
Well, I'm happy to hear that y'all are looking actively for, the age group of some of our participants here today. And of course, able to also offer that summer program. HYLA serves law students as well. So I know that's top of mind for those actively seeking employment over the next year. Next, I'd like to turn to Jen, who has joined us today as someone who made a move during the pandemic. Can you tell us all about that process from interview to integration?
Yes, absolutely. So Jackson Walker, like most firms, pivoted quickly and figured out the Zoom and everything remote. So I had talked to the firm in 2019. My mentor was at the firm. I wasn't going through a recruiter, so it was a little bit of a different process. But because of a conflict, everything was on hold. And then all of a sudden, everything picked up maybe May sometime. And as people may or may not know, bankruptcy is slammed right now. So they really, really, really needed somebody like right then. At one point, I was going to go in before conflicts were done and I'd just do all new cases. That's how badly they needed somebody. So the process was quicker, I think, than it would have been not in a pandemic. I had one day of interviews where I was trying to count. It's hard because we had different Zoom breakouts and I just can't remember the number of people, but it was around 10 people. I knew a lot of the bankruptcy people in the section that I was moving into, just because bankruptcy is a small community. One of them was my good friend. And then one of them, like I said, was my mentor. So I met other people in the firm and then in the section that I didn't know already. So I just had back-to-back Zoom calls, for hours, like a lot of us do today anyway. And I got to meet people in the firm that way. So I think the interview process was fairly simple and probably simpler via Zoom. I didn't have to go to the office. I wore yoga pants and just a blazer and just sat at my kitchen table and interviewed. And it was, by that time, that was around May, like I said. So we were used to doing Zoom calls, so I felt comfortable. So it was fairly organic. And then once I started at the firm, I think Marie just hit the nail on the head where everything is deliberate. So a lot of things you would learn at a firm, kind of the groove of the firm and how things work, just simply by being there. I joined in the summer, which is when the summer associate program is. So normally in non-pandemic times, you'd have a lot of events that you would just go to and get to know people and see them. And then you just start seeing people around the firm and maybe you grab lunch together or, maybe you're getting coffee at the same time. And this has been a lot different. And I've had to, put things on my calendar that I need to go to this firm happy hour because I need to meet more people and sort of integrate myself into the firm. And Jackson Walker did a great job of telling me about this happy hour and making sure that I got into the rhythm of the firm and the events that they were having. But, like everybody, we're all tired of these virtual Zooms. And so it definitely takes some planning and prep. And just, I love that word, being deliberate. That's what it's taken for me to integrate.
Zoom fatigue is real,
Yes.
for sure. And I guess, how have you found collaboration as far as workflow and assignments, even though your practice area is absolutely slammed right now? Can you tell us more about that specifically?
Yeah, I think that our firm does a really, really good job of we have to, because like I said, we are fortunate to have been very busy during the pandemic, but quite honestly, we are just slammed. So you have to be organized in how you're assigning work. So everybody has the workflow that they know. Some people lead this case, some people lead that case, some people are backup on this case or backup on that case. And that's really helped where it's kind of, it's kept you in line where you may not be able to just call the partner next door and say, hey, do you need me to do this? You just know that, hey, you're in the green lane in this case. So everything that's green, that's what you're touching and that's what you're on. And that has made, a night and day difference. If you didn't have that organization with how you're going to assign work, I think it's a lot harder.
JB, has the experience that Jen's described been similar to what candidates you've put forward have been going through as well?
I think so. It's interesting. I think the firms that maybe eased into the virtual environment of onboarding and integration, the larger firms may be a little bit better at it because they already had some of the technology and the kind of processes in place. Because in larger firms, particularly in big law, where you have offices all over the country or the world, you might have people that are constantly integrating people in another market. So that is a little bit easier. And I think the number one issue that I see with associates, particularly younger associates, we were talking about this before the Zoom call started, that it seems like it's the younger associates that are having the hardest time acclimating to this, and I think it makes perfect sense. But it really comes down to a matter of communication and accessibility to people that know what they need to do and questions that they can ask. I think back to my first years as an attorney, and if I couldn't walk down to the hall to my partner's office to ask a question, or go to my senior associate and ask him a question, I don't know what I've done for a couple of things, but I think that the number one trend I'm seeing with issues, it really is about communication and accessibility to people that have answers that people need. So firms would be doing themselves a favor to think about how they are allowing themselves to be open to young associates and to laterals and to anyone really that might be struggling with kind of getting up to speed in this new virtual environment that we're all going through. So, where to ask questions, when to ask questions. I heard stories from associates that lateraled in that needed to ask a question to a partner about something that was very pressing, and they couldn't get in touch with them. What do you do if you have a question for a partner and you call them and they don't answer, you email them and they don't respond to you? These are things that firms are going to really need to think about, because lateral retention during all of this, it's a day-by-day thing. I mean, we're seeing trends develop that we've never seen before. Historically, whenever we saw firms, or an associate or a partner for that matter, a lateral into a firm, you'd think there's going to be a year there where they're just not going to talk to recruiters. That usually just doesn't happen. All of that has changed. People are interested in hearing out what recruiters have to say almost from day one. So firms need to think about how they're integrating their people into the firm, because lateral retention is going to be really interesting for the next couple of years.
Marie, how has your group been handling interviewing and onboarding?
So the interviewing process, and I will back up a little bit of what I talked about earlier. We also did do OCI this year for next year's summer associates. So we actually do have summer associates next year, but all of our interviewing has been virtual, which, it's been difficult. We've tried to make it smaller groups, like just 2 attorneys, or maybe just 1 attorney with 1 candidate at a time. Whereas in the past, we might've had 3 or 4 in a conference room, like back to back. But with Zoom, it's so hard. Everybody talks over each other, and it's hard to really hear people. So we've done that. One of the positives I've found, I know this sounds ironic, is when we're trying to put together a schedule, if we have somebody coming in as a lateral, and I want them to meet with these 6 people, because they're the people they'll work with, they're the key people in the section they're going to be working. Sometimes it's hard to get all 6 of them together at the same time or the same afternoon as that candidate. With Zoom, it's made it a little easier, where you may meet with the same 6 people, but they'll be spread out over the day, because this person's available at 9, and then you could meet with this person at 2 in the afternoon. So it accomplishes the same thing. It's maybe a little more piecemeal, but I found that we've been able to get you better candidates, or better attorneys in the office as a match for the candidates sometimes because of that. So that's been a small positive that I've found. With that, I will say we haven't really changed the number of people they're interviewing with, in the sense of we haven't expanded them or reduced them greatly. But we've also, again, similarly, we've had more of an ability to get them to meet with key people in our other offices sometimes. Because while we have, for example, we have international trade in our Houston office, but we also have a lot of people in our DC office that work in international trade. So now it's a little more seamless to have them meet with them, as opposed to trying to set up conference rooms and the big video conferencing that we used to do. Now it's just easier on a laptop. So I found some of that has actually been beneficial, but we are still doing it. And with the onboarding, again, it's the same issues, just trying to be more deliberate about introducing them to the group. Something else that I think we've done in the Houston office at Baker, I don't know that all our offices have, is that we've had, up until recently, weekly associate meetings and weekly partner meetings with the managing partner, which I think has helped with some of that. Number one, it's an opportunity to get updates on what is going on in the firm. With the pandemic, we are partially open, so that, like, I'm going to go in the office tomorrow for a mediation. So we've had that, but keeping up to date with that, with the COVID protocols, the things that are going on in the office, just generally, sometimes even just complaining, like, hey, this is what's going on and this is a problem I'm having, and how do I get this resolved? And the same thing with the partners. So it's a weekly meeting, and sometimes it's just a chance to see each other, For those of us who, I've worked at Baker Hostetler, I don't know if I mentioned it, for 11 years now. I've been practicing for 15. And so these are people that I used to see every day, and now I don't see them at all, or I talk to them on the phone. So that sometimes that was just a nice break for 30, 40 minutes a week. You get to see everybody. So we have tried to do that, I think, to help. Now, as part Zoom fatigue, I think our managing partners in part also fatigued with it. So we're doing them less frequently, either on an as needed basis, but at least once every 2 weeks or once a month, we're still having those. So I think that's helps the process out a little bit.
I know my happy hour Zoom calendar has, decreased as the months have gone by, but it sounds like your firm is doing something similar to what Jen's doing at Jackson Walker with happy hours and some, deliberately planned meetings, which are so important since you don't have that water cooler or coffee maker conversation anymore. So Jen, I have to ask, have you actually claimed an office yet or been into the office? Tell me more about that.
So I had it until this week. My partner and I actually went on like a 2.5-month road trip just because we could, and you can work from anywhere. And then we just got back last week. So I kind of wanted a change of scenery. I hadn't set up my home office yet from being home. So I've been going into the office. I do have an office. Everyone told me I did, and it turns out I do. There's a name on it and everything. And it's been nice, actually. I went in 2 days this week. I stayed home just because I wanted to watch election results today, but I'll probably go in tomorrow, maybe Friday. It's a nice change of pace.
Apologies there, network difficulties due to my dog in the background. I wanted to know more, if you could offer some advice to participants who are interviewing, especially those who may not have the benefit of knowing some people at the firm already. What would you tell them?
I would tell them I know this sounds really weird, but I remember I got this advice when I was an associate, that it's nice to have associates who are excited to be there. And so, when you go to the interview, just try and be excited and a person that people are going to want to work with, because everybody's on these Zoom calls all day. And yes, of course, I'm sure JB and Marie will tell you, you need to do your homework on the firm. You need to know the people that you're meeting with. Yes, absolutely. But at the end of the day, you need to be somebody that they want to work with. And that happens to be someone, who's likable, who's excited about the job, who's excited to get moving. And maybe you're kind of working in this idea of some business development, and that you understand how a law firm works, that you understand it's not just about work, but it's about looking to the future and some client development. I think if you can talk about that a little bit in these interviews, I think that's helpful. It kind of shows that, look, you really know what's going on in the firm. You understand the bottom line. And I think that's important.
It's definitely great to have a diverse slate of topics to talk about. How were you able to highlight your experience in speaking to the folks that you hadn't met?
So I had done Jackson Walker does bankruptcy. It does a lot of debtor side cases, and I had a lot of debtor side experience. So I was able to actually, run through the cases that I had done. Again, bankruptcy is a small community. Really, we're practicing in front of 2 judges in Houston. And so I could talk about this judge. I was in this case. We were working on, this issue, this sale, and this hearing, and this was the problem. And it's kind of similar to what's going on in this case right now, because everyone else's cases. And so I went through, just because debtor side, I went through the list of cases that I had, and some issues that I could see were relevant to the cases that they're working on, because the cases are in the news. I mean, it's not hard to figure out most firms' cases and what they're doing. You can look at the docket. And so I just talked about each case.
Well, good advice on doing your homework and being prepared for that interview phase. And I guess I'd like to open up more generally now. Clearly we've talked about some factors related to the pandemic, about firms being concerned about workflow, candidates being concerned about integration and communication. Can you guys comment more generally about what's driving, firm hiring decisions and candidate movement?
I'm happy to jump in on that. I think there's differences and there's similarities. I think from a candidate's perspective, uncertainty about the situation that's going on in their firm financially, workflow wise, is the partner that I'm working with all the time going to leave? Am I going with them? I think these are things that you get all the time, right? I think the unique thing about COVID is the financial aspect of the firm, salary cuts, furloughs, which it seems like in Texas, it wasn't hit too hard with that stuff, which is great. But that is motivating candidates. On the litigation side, I'm seeing just a curiosity because they know that there's opportunity, and they know, well, people that pay attention to the market, there's going to be a lot of partner moves in the litigation space in Texas over the next couple of years. The same thing happened after 2008, 2010, 2011. I wasn't recruiting then. I had just gotten out of law school, but I remember everybody telling me those were some of the busiest years in partner movements ever. So anytime there's that kind of fluctuation in the market, there's going to be a lot of associate movement. So litigation associates kind of are curious. They're curious to know what the options are out there. Corporate associates, it's a little bit different. It's about where can I go to make sure that I'm developing as an attorney effectively? Who can I get meaningful work from? What firms are doing the work that I want to do? And my advice to a candidate that isn't a corporate associate now would be like, you need to probably have some patience. It's going to take a little bit for that stuff to come back, but it will come back, definitely. On the law firm side, it's really interesting. I listened to the podcast, the panel that you guys had in May, and I can echo Megan's sentiment about opportunistic hiring versus need-based hiring. Opportunistic hiring was very active in Texas over the past 5 years. There were times where as a recruiter, you could find somebody that was practicing in capital markets or finance at a major firm. And it wasn't a question of whether you were going to find a place for them. It was just a matter of where and when. That stuff has changed a little bit. The opportunistic hiring, even on the litigation side, is kind of down. So things are still very much needs-based. We're seeing opportunities be driven by specific things as opposed to, hey, we'll take a look at candidates. But there is something interesting also that's been developing, and this is all over the country, but big law kind of slowed down a little bit for a little while. We saw a lot of repurposing of associates internally to make, help retention, right? Say maybe a litigator, the litigation group's busy, they throw them into bankruptcy litigation or, a million other things that could happen. Small to mid-sized firms have been doing very well over the past few months. And I think that's a trend that's going to continue to develop as well, particularly with rate pressure from clients dealing with their own financial concerns. Financially secure mid-market and boutique firms are doing great right now. And I think that that's going to continue as a trend. And for people that, maybe are a little bit disillusioned with the life in big law, or for new attorneys that are coming out, I would consider it. It's definitely an avenue to look at. And there's firms that are for sure hiring in Texas and New York and DC. We see a lot of activity in that space.
What are the best resources to find these openings, apart from contacting you, of course?
Well, that does create some difficulty. So, obviously a good recruiter, whether they are a national player or a market-based person, connecting with a recruiter is a great way to find out about positions at smaller firms, because a lot of those firms don't post positions like big firms do. Local networking, that's a great way to do it. And it's tougher now, obviously, but as we start to integrate back into meeting people in person, hopefully that continues. For Texas, I think the Texas Bar Job Flash, I'm not sure if people are assigned to it, or you can get an alert in your email. And a lot of smaller firms use that as a resource to advertise their needs. And a lot of these firms don't work with recruiters. They just don't like to pay fees, and that's understandable. So looking at that, I think there's things like Go Big Law are a good way to look at large firm hiring needs. LinkedIn is a great way to do it. And obviously just connecting with people in the market. If you have a particular practice area that you're trying to move into, or you're trying to lateral within, connect with people, partners that are in that space, connect with other associates. Use the networking tools that have become available to us over the course of the pandemic. That's my best advice for people to find smaller firm positions and boutiques.
And you mentioned the move to meeting people in person again. Have you seen more of that in the interview process than we did maybe 6 months ago?
Yes, definitely. And there's geographic differences between this too. So Texas seems to be very much or much more kind of, I would say, for lack of a better term, aggressive with getting people back into the office, setting up lunches as opposed to Zoom calls. I think a baseline across the board, firms in Texas still are utilizing virtual interviewing to great effect. And I don't think it's going to change. So tips for everyone out there that's thinks they might be a little bit awkward on a Zoom call or a video interview, it's time to practice that stuff because I don't think it's going away. Outside of Texas, it's been interesting. We've seen a lot of markets where resistance to in-person meetings and interviews is still very high, where we have clients that are refusing to do it. We have associates that are refusing to do it. So I think this will change as things start to get back to normal. But in Texas particularly, we are seeing a trend develop where there are people that are willing to meet in person. And I think that's a good thing, particularly for smaller firms, like I said earlier, that don't have the robust technological advantages of a large firm. They're kind of, handshake type firms. They really do like to meet people in person. But it's getting much better in that respect in Texas.
You brought it up, so I'll take the bait. What's going on in terms of salary cuts, signing bonuses, year-end bonuses?
So, salary cuts, I think by and large, there are a few firms in the big law space that I think struggled with it. And, they were forced to furlough and lay off, and we're not going to name any names. But I think across the board, I think what we've seen is firms being pretty smart about it, actually. They're not doing it to make sure the people at the top are making the most money. I think they're doing it to retain people. And firms learned a lot of lessons from 2008 in overhiring, having too many people staffed up. So I think we'll start to see salary cuts start to get layered back into kind of cutting those back to where normal people's compensation. Bonuses, that's a firm by firm thing, and unfortunately for attorneys and recruiters, a lot of that stuff isn't public, whether it's on above the law or something like that. But I think generally speaking, we're seeing firms start to roll those things back if they can, and with bonuses, I think that firms are making a dedicated effort to try to make people whole, and attorneys, particularly associates in big law, are paying attention, and that's one of those things where if all of their friends are getting their bonuses and you're not, that's a thing that's going to make them maybe listen to a recruiter or explore out there. But from what I've seen in the market in Texas and beyond is a trend towards things getting back to normal, which is great.
I covered a lot of ground with JB there. Marie, is there anything you'd like to chime in on?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm going to take us back a little bit to, you started this with like what's been driving the hiring, either the hiring or the lack of hiring. And I can tell you initially when it started, again, we had people we were looking to fill needs. So we continued, we brought in some people in labor and employment and other areas. We also, our firm had the unique position of opening a Dallas office. I think at the end, technically it was open at the end of last year, but I don't think we announced it till the first quarter of this year, right before the pandemic. So we had, and our Dallas office has grown. It's still a small office because it's a new office, but we had a lot of people that we have hired during the pandemic, brought in during the pandemic. So that's driven some of our hiring decisions. Both getting that, office off the ground and started, and then also trying to be very selective in who we bring in because we didn't want to grow it too large, too fast. We don't want to do that generally speaking, but especially during the pandemic. So those have been two things, the need, and I'll be completely candid. Finances did impact some of our initial decisions of, okay, well, let's stop actively looking for a little while and see what happens. Because as we all know, this was supposed to be 2 weeks and then it turned into a month and 2 months. And then, it's, like 7 months later and we're all still at home. But so we started that and we were more conservative in the beginning. However, now that we're seeing, okay, we've weathered this storm, we know there's still some uncertainty. There could be second waves, but it does look like we're going to be okay. As I mentioned, we're back in the office. We're technically rotating 1 week in, 2 weeks out in theory. And so only 1/3 of the office would be in at any time. Practically speaking, that's not what happens. There are a lot of people who still don't come in for a variety of reasons. And there's some of us, I'm in at least 2 to 3 days every week, in part because it's easier for me. But with that, we're seeing things kind of get back to normal with that. And so I think the firm is starting to feel like, okay, we can open up more. And again, as I mentioned, we have the need in labor and employment. I do see some other areas will probably, in part because of all the technology that's that everybody's using now, because we're all at home or we're all quarantined somewhere, our data privacy group is probably going to need some, some filler as well and expansion. The other thing that I wanted to mention about that JB had talked about was the in-person meetings. I can say with respect to our firm, I personally am not opposed to meeting somebody in person. I'm not going to go wild and have a huge happy hour right now, but meeting somebody for coffee or lunch, following the protocols, I'd be fine with it. But I can tell you our firm nationwide, because we're across the country, we have offices in DC, New York, places where they're not so open yet. Our firm would probably, not push that. Two reasons. Number one, we want to be consistent across all the offices, and it seems unfair to, hey, the Houston associates or the Houston onboards are getting to meet people in person, but not in DC, not in New York. So we're trying to be a little more consistent. And number two, we recognize that just because Texas and Houston are a little more open, not everybody's comfortable with that yet. And we don't want to make somebody who is interviewing with us from the get-go feel uncomfortable of, oh, they're making me meet them in person for coffee, and I'm not comfortable with that. I'd rather do a Zoom. So we're trying to be conscientious, I think, of that, of the fact that, and they may have somebody that lives with them that has, is high risk, has been exposed before, so they're a little gun shy about going out. So we're trying to be, again, we'd be open to it if somebody offered it, but we're not pushing it. And that's just something else we're trying to think about. And what we're doing is the comfort of the person on the other side, and not making them feel like, well, if I don't go, I won't get this job. We're open to, we want them to feel comfortable from day one with meeting us. So I hope, does that answer your questions?
All good information. And it's so interesting to hear what other firms are doing in terms of the return to work back in the office, whether it's a third of people in at a time or something different. My firm's been having those same conversations as well. Jen, do you guys have any type of a formal policy at Jackson Walker?
No, so we sort of did the whole thing. We also had meetings, I think at first maybe every 2 weeks, and now they've kind of dialed back to every month, because it's like you can only give so many updates of, we don't really know what's going on, but nothing's changed, you're still staying at home. And so that's kind of the party line. I want to say they've finally said through the end of the year, but it's just like, when it's safe again, everyone roll with the punches. You do have the opportunity to go in. I wouldn't say that they've relaxed, but everybody's figured out, like the world, we've figured out a way that you can do it safely. And so if you can do that, you can go into the office. Like I said, I've been into the office. You just have to wear a mask. You have to be in your office, closed door, practice social distancing if you're in the hallway. But for the most part, everybody's at home. The office is empty, and there's no plan to return at this point.
And this is a question, perhaps for Jen and Marie, that somewhat goes to the issue of hiring. But in firms like yours with multiple offices, has it been easier to staff cases across offices, or, easier than it normally would have before everyone was so comfortable with Zoom and video conferencing? And has that had any effect on hiring?
It's been easier. So I'm in bankruptcy, and when you go into your first day hearing in bankruptcy, there could be 200 people attending that hearing because you're trying to get the business to continue operating. And that has been a 180 where everything's online. It is so much easier. It doesn't matter what office you're in. It doesn't matter where your client is, which is always the problem, getting them to your office to practice for the first day, getting them to court downtown, which is a nightmare. I think that's going to remain after this. And so I think that's been a positive during all of this.
I would agree with that there are those benefits where if you have a client who is in LA, I have a client in LA, they don't have to fly out here for a hearing now. They can just appear by Zoom, and that's helped clients out with costs and kind of bearing some of the brunt of this. With the other part of it, as far as like assigning work and I guess working across offices, I don't know that it's made it any easier. We were pretty good about that. It may have opened up some doors for us in the sense of, like, again, based on need, where maybe JB talked about kind of shifting of some of our associates within the firm or within the office, as opposed to if this area is a little slower. I know we've had some of our corporate associates who have reached out to labor and employment and said, I know you're slammed, can I help you? And so with some of that, we maybe have used the technology to have them helping out with cases in other offices to help keep them busy, to help, the firm going, keep the firm going. But I haven't seen too much more than that. It's been opportunistic. It hasn't necessarily been made easier or made difficult with respect to working across the offices. It's kind of the same as we've been doing.
Maybe you guys were just ahead of the game.
I don't know.
And before I turn it over to Jane for our Q&A portion, JB, can you just give us, a broad overview or outlook of what we might see in 2021, across the market in terms of hiring, and if there's, any specific things being currently posted for 2021 start dates toward the end of the year as we wind down 2020?
Absolutely. I mean, and kind of looking at the trends developing over the past few months can give us a little bit of insight into what we can expect for the first quarter and second quarter of next year. I can definitely say that people and positions that are posted now or that are active now, unless it is just some dire need, these are all going to be 2021 start dates, most likely at this point, especially as we get into December. So firms that have needs now, again, unless it's some extremely dire need, they're already considering that this person's going to be starting next year. And as far as the outlook on the job market next year, we're already seeing things start to turn around, and barring, I hope that there's no problems with the virus, and I hope that there's not a recurrence and a surge that's going to put us right back where we started. But assuming that things stay on the current trend, I think it's going to take a little bit for the lateral markets to get back to where they were in 2018 and 2019. But it couldn't get much worse than it was in June and July. So we're seeing things start to get much, much better. I think that litigation, like I kind of said earlier, is going to stay kind of this thing that's driving lateral needs across the country. Corporate is going to take a little bit longer, but we are seeing some movement in that space, particularly in private equity. That seems to be a space that is gaining some traction, with the financial, and I think that'll continue to develop too as we kind of get on the back end of any economic problems that may have been caused over the past year, assuming again that there's not a huge hiccup there. Capital markets, there's been rumors that these things are going to start to pick up a little bit. Things that I'm not so sure about, maybe like real estate, corporate finance. I'm curious to see how these things start to come back. But from a practice area standpoint and trends that we're kind of seeing develop across the country, antitrust is it's not necessarily a Texas thing, but man, it is busy. And one of the trends that we're seeing with firms, particularly larger firms, is a willingness to open their needs up to other markets. So if they have a need that they may prefer to place in DC, if they have an office in Houston or Dallas, we're seeing an interest in maybe allowing people to work from there, or if they want to relocate instead of coming to DC, maybe they can go there. So antitrust is definitely something that we've seen get far busier than it has been in the past couple of years, and it has been pretty active. Insurance defense, insurance related matters, whether it's transactional or litigation, that's going to continue to be really busy as we move into next year, I think. Healthcare related stuff, it's kind of obviously that has been interesting to see kind of grow over the past few months. And I think that's going to continue both from a transactional and a regulatory perspective. I mentioned life sciences earlier. Anything that has to do with pharma, biotech, those areas of practice, whether it's an IP related thing or otherwise, they're extremely busy, and we see a lot of partner needs around the country in that area. So life sciences, I expect to continue to grow. Technology transactions, that's another area where we're seeing a lot of new need, and those are sometimes hard positions to fill for young attorneys that might be looking to get into certain niches that are going to be in demand moving forward. I think those areas are great to look at. And I can reiterate renewables. I mean, and that's an area where I think Texas is going to really try to kind of get more involved as we move on, because although we've got huge renewable companies here, developers and operators, There's not a ton of legal matters that get handled in Texas, but I think that's going to change, particularly as these renewable firms or renewable groups within these firms start to really try to grow and develop and build out their practices. I don't think it's going to be a DC, New York practice as much as it has been in the past. And we're already seeing traditional energy firms in Texas that have been very deeply seated in oil and gas, midstream, upstream, start to really try to shift and get into renewables. And I think that's a great thing. So if I leave everybody with anything, I think it's a little bit of optimism. You know, it's been a rough year, and you know, new attorneys that are coming out of law school this year, I feel for you. It's not the easiest time ever to find positions, but it's going to get better. And for laterals that are thinking of moving, I think next year is going to be a much better environment to seek out new opportunities, regardless of practice area, than what we saw this year.
Well, with that, I will turn it back to Jane for our Q&A portion. I know we've already got one question submitted.
That's right. It looks like we're doing great on time. We received one question, and maybe we'll start with JB and then Marie can also answer. What is the best advice on how to obtain a position as an associate in labor and employment right out of law school, rather than going through the summer associate program or lateraling?
I think it's a great question, and you know, it's like I said just a second ago, you know, for people that are coming out of law school, this isn't the easiest market to enter into. There's no way to kind of say it to make it sound better. It's tough. Labor and employment, the advantage I see in labor and employment is that it's not a big law only practice. There are firms that are small all the way up to the biggest firms in the world that have very busy labor and employment practices. So, you know, if you're not somebody that is just dead set on big law, you know, it's big law or nothing, I would strongly suggest that you kind of open your mind about the prospects of gaining experience maybe at a smaller firm. That labor and employment, like I said, is a unique practice in that you can find very sophisticated labor employment practices, whether at small boutiques or, you know, smaller market firms. As far as straight out of law school, I would say if you're a young associate, I think the best way to find opportunities in this new world that we're entering into post-COVID is to be able to express to a partner that's hiring as to why you're trying to get into that area. Because I think that there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be going after positions, a lot of people that are just kind of going after perhaps any position that they can get. So to separate yourself from people as a young attorney, I think you have to build kind of a track record of being able to express to a labor and employment partner why you're getting into that area. What are you passionate about? Why does it click with you? If you are a 3L or somebody that's just coming out, I mean, networking is your friend. You should learn your market, learn what firms practice the type of law you want to go after in your market, whether it's labor and employment or M&A, and particularly within labor and employment, because like I said, there's smaller firms that aren't as publicized as others. So do your research, network with the right people, reach out to partners. You know, I'm a recruiter, so we're a little bit aggressive when it comes to reaching out to people randomly, but if you're passionate about the work that you do and that you really want to get into labor and employment, connect with people on LinkedIn, reach out to partners, ask for their advice. You never know what person you might connect with. That could be a friend of a person that is a partner at a firm that's hiring. That's how this stuff happens sometimes. So that would probably be my advice to people that are trying to find labor and employment positions that are just coming out of law school or, you know, are at the very beginning of law school.
Okay, I can follow up on that. And I would say everything that JB said is great advice. I do know that, yes, I am big law, but at the same time, he's right about starting out. Sometimes you don't, unless your heart is just set on big law, you know, be open to smaller firms, because a lot of times you'll get great experience there and you may be able to use that work. You know, I also don't want to encourage you to work somewhere and then bail on them after you know, gotten your training. But at the same time, there are a lot of people that do that. I myself was a lateral. I worked for a regional firm that had offices in Texas and Louisiana. The Houston office was the smallest at the time, and worked there for 4 years and then came over to Baker Hostetler. So those smaller firms can give you a lot of the opportunities, can give you the experience that you might not get as quickly at a larger law firm, although in labor and employment, you probably would, just being candid. It is a pretty active group, at least in our office in Houston. The other thing he mentioned, absolutely use your networks. I know right now it's hard. There's not as many industry happy hours or other events you can go to, or attending, a CLE like this in person, where you might have an hour afterwards where people can meet and talk. So you don't have those opportunities, but reach out. Don't get to the point of harassing, but send an email, reach out to partners at firms with things you're interested in. Believe it or not, some people are very busy, but some of us do like mentoring. One of the things I love most about my position is getting to meet and talk to law students through the interview process. I recently did a set of mock interviews with students where I spend an hour with them. We do a mock interview, and then I'll spend 30 minutes answering questions about, giving advice about the interview, but answering questions about the process. And I encourage them, and I mean it. Anybody that I meet at those, reach out to me, send me, questions you have. I'm happy to guide you. If you're looking for a job, somebody can email me. I may not know somebody, but I can put you in touch with our in recruiter in our office, and she may know somebody at a different firm. And I've actually helped people get jobs that way, people that I've met. So keep those networks up, being proactive, not to the point of, annoying people, but being proactive and reaching out and just saying, hey, do you have 10 minutes to chat today? If you're comfortable meeting them for coffee somewhere, just keeping that up, and eventually you'll kind of work your way in and find a position.
Jen, to our law students question, can you speak a little bit to how you found your first job out of law school?
Yep, I found it on Craigslist.
Me too, no kidding.
So, I moved here, I had zero connections. I didn't go to school here. I needed a job. I couldn't work for free, although I almost worked for free with my first job, but hey, it was a job. And I started to meet people. My new boss is somebody that I met, and I would talk to her, and I would see her at court because she worked at the courthouse before this. She was a law clerk, and now she hired me. So it's just, I just echo that. I understand wanting to get into big law. The salary is more. I know you think the training is better, but I don't agree with that. There are certainly formal trainings and formal mentorships, and yeah, there's a lot of good about big law, but experience, you're going to get so much experience at a small firm, and it is invaluable coming into a big law firm with that experience. So even though you might take a pay cut, please don't cross off small law firms, and definitely get to know people. When I was in DC, we called them informational interviews, and that's what I did when I got to Houston. And it helped. And that's how I got my job, truly.
Well, thanks so much to all of our participants and our panelists. Again, JB Pullias of VOYlegal, Marie Carlisle of Baker Hostetler, and Jen Graham of Jackson Walker. Again, this program is accredited for 1 hour of CLE. The course number is in the chat. It's 174-10263. I'll stick around for a bit should anybody want to have small talk, but otherwise, thanks again, and look forward to seeing you all at future HYLA events.
Thank you.
Thanks. And I want to note, it looks like we have another question from Alexandria real quick. And she asks, how can you ensure a first-year associate job is a good decision without knowing anyone connected to the firm? I think part of that answer would be the same as we were talking about. Talk to other people. You may not know anybody at Baker Hostetler, but you might know other attorneys at other firms, and you can talk to them. I can tell you, generally speaking, if you are interested in if there's an opening that you're interested in specifically with our firm, you can reach out to our associates. Sometimes talk to the associates, talk to the associate spouses. I know that sounds random, but if you meet somebody somewhere, you can talk to them. They're a good gauge. I know we had somebody who went through our the OCI process this past August from the University of Houston, and he knew he had an interview with us through OCI. He had dropped and then got the interview. And before he met with any of us at OCI, he had emailed several different attorneys in the firm, including me. He had actually, to reach out just to talk to them about things. He had actually had meetings before I knew about this with 5 different attorneys in the firm to ensure. He's like, look, I think I'm interested, but I'd like to talk to people. I'd like to find out their experiences. And he did that all on his own, just by sending emails. And our partners and associates took the time and spoke with him. So don't just assume, I guess my point with that is don't just assume that attorneys at a firm are too busy. Sometimes they are. And sometimes you just have to hit the right people and maybe find somebody in the section you're interested in and just email them and say, hey, I'm interested in your firm. Would you maybe have 10, 15 minutes for me to talk to you? And see, they may bite. It's just a great way, I think, of doing that informally and learning more about the firm.
Thanks for picking up that question, Marie. We've actually got one more. If you think that you would perform better at an in-person interview, but you're offered a virtual option, is it appropriate to ask for that in-person interview?
I don't know if JB wants to answer, but in my opinion, I don't think it's, I wouldn't say it's inappropriate. You might judge the person you're talking to. Generally speaking, in our office, our HR manager is the one who would handle that. And she's pretty open. She's pretty candid. And she would be honest with you and say, appreciate the offer, but the 2 attorneys you're working with are ones that are more concerned about COVID and they're not likely to meet with you in person. She would tell you that, and it would not come back to bite you or haunt you. She would probably never let us know you even asked. Unless it was somebody like me where she knows what I'm thinking, and she would be like, Marie, would you be interested in this? So I don't think it hurts, but I would know the audience maybe a little more, and be just, I don't want to be very careful, not careful, that's not the right word, but just cautious in how you approach it, and see, so that you realize you're not stepping on toes, or you recognize it's a potential landmine for you if they're a firm who's not open. But if you already know, like our Houston office, we're open. I think our managing partner would like us to be more open, just because I think he wants us to get back to normal and to feel normal, because it is nice the days I'm in and I see a few people there. So maybe research some of those questions, and that may give you insight. Like if it's an office that hasn't opened up at all, they have nothing, I might not ask in that office. But if it's one that's partially open, you might take the gamble.
I can add a couple of thoughts to that. That's actually a really interesting question, and I have not got it from that angle yet. It's usually coming from the firm trying to get a candidate to meet in person, and the candidate's not comfortable doing it. And we've heard a lot of stories like that. This is a different kind of situation, and I will say that you gotta kind of be careful how you approach something like this. If a firm is suggesting a Zoom interview or a video interview, there's probably a reason